Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. As usual, I'm your host, Hannah Munro, and with me today is Ajit Kumar, who is a finance leader who's worked with both telecoms and in the software AI space as well. So, welcome, Ajit. It's lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you, Hannah. It's my pleasure to be here today.
Fabulous. So, tell us a little bit about your journey, Ajit. What's your story?
I'm originally from India, from a southern part of India, from a city called Bengaluru. So this is now more recently known around the world as technology hub of India. But when I grew up, it was also known as an air-conditioned city. We're talking about all the environmental changes. Now it's no longer an air-conditioned city, but it used to be once. So that's where I come from. I grew up in Bangalore, did my early education, and also started to work for an international company headquartered in Bangalore. And then, they found an opportunity for me to go on a secondment in 2004, and that's how my international journey has started. And since then, I've been living and working in 5 different countries, and more recently, in the last 10 years, living in the UK.
And that's an interesting piece in terms of, obviously that shift from India to a lot, by the sounds of it, a number of different countries. How did from a professional perspective, did you find a difference in the working cultures as you sort of moved around those different countries?
Absolutely, absolutely. People are different. Corporate cultures are different in every organization that you work with. I had an amazing experience of working with and getting a mix of both of these across different places because the company that I used to work for had a number of international expansion projects. Some starting from scratch and some through an acquisition. So when you go through an acquisition, you incorporate a corporate culture, and then it's in a different country, so it brings you a different culture from people point of view as well. So yes, absolutely, completely different. But what I enjoyed the most is plugging into those connection, and I used to work for this amazing company back in India where they're really people first kind of an approach to everything that they did. So that helped me in bridging that gap and being able to represent the headquarters in working and connecting with various different countries that I was in.
And you talked about the fact that obviously one of the organizations you worked with had very much an acquisition approach to global
Mhm.
expansion. Tell us a little bit about how that was managed. Did it go well? Were there any lessons learned from that sort of acquisition process?
Yeah, plenty. And as you know, the synergies will really come to reality if you have thought through, or if you have put the right set of people behind in terms of managing the post merger integration kind of projects. So I evolved and recognized myself as that kind of an integration leader, simply because I was put in that kind of a spot, right? So when the business cases are done and you go through a number of scenarios planned out, and then actually on the ground when you want people to work together, it's really how you treat people, how you manage, and that really embracing the fact that you're in a different culture. You want this company who have come part of you, the people are used to a different culture, and they are coming as part of you. How do you welcome them and also acknowledge that as from a company point of view, you are actually going into a new place. So that is where the companies need to understand there is a lot to learn and accommodate, rather than expect them to learn and accommodate. So it goes both ways. So that's what I have learned. And for me, it was even advantageous because I was in a different country in their land. So it came naturally for me that I'm in a different country in different place. So I have to learn and adapt to who they are, and then that helped me in terms of building that personal rapport, and started also had a lot of education to do back in the headquarters. This is how it works in different parts of the world, and this is what we need to recognize and have that patience and walk through that change.
And how did you manage that expectation between obviously the acquiring company and the acquiree? Like, were the expectations set well on both sides?
It was rather difficult in the early stage. To be honest, I thought I would probably lose trust from the acquiring company in the headquarters, that they will no longer trust me because now I'm speaking the language of the acquiree, right? So that was a real challenge for me in the beginning. But over a period of time, when you know, actually start building, these are the reasons, and I believe it, and then bring them up to speed, it started easing out. But there were a number of challenges where I may not have particularly succeeded in the early stage. But the consistency in pursuit that this is the overall objective is important. So yes, like I said, for the success for me, it mostly resonated with people, and then of course the processes and the overall objectives, which is also part of the business case that we put in place, saying that what processes, systems that we have in place, what's the business objective, etc. Always use those metrics to validate whether are we playing, and is it all falling in place. If not, identify the early indicators to do a course correction. So that's a holistic approach that I would say.
And how important did you think, you talked a lot about being on the ground and in with that acquisition? How important was that to the success that you did see?
It was absolutely important. I would, from any roles that I have played, if I were to do it again, can I do some parts of it being completely remote and having nobody on the ground? I would see that as a huge challenge. It is simply because you can say anything, you can show anything, but to be able to really connect with people, you have to spend as much time. Being in a completely a pandemic situation is a different world because everybody was remote. But otherwise, you'll have to invest in having your integration leaders to be on the ground in their place, to understand the nuances.
And what other lessons did you learn now you've sort of stepped back and looked at that acquisition? What did you wish you knew going into that?
Yeah, I mean, some of those things. So much later in my career or in my life, I also took a 1 year MBA program, and then I chose a business school which also stood for diversity and inclusion. So in that process, there were many teachings that I learned a lot about. How do you identify cultural differences? You don't have to know it all, but if you learn that these are the kind of differences that exists, and be mentally prepared, because there is no one solution, there is no one silver bullet or a magic formula. But as long as you're aware where all the differences that could exist, that kind of education is super important. And that's probably one thing that I would say, that if I knew it before, there was a kind of training within the organization just to embrace that, when you are working and expanding and bringing in new people into the organization, whether it's natural organic growth, where you will start adding people, or inorganic growth by merging with other companies, etc. Being aware of that kind of different mindset, and people think differently, and it takes time to accommodate, and how can you accelerate a kind of an education program would be super useful.
And that's, I guess, some of the challenge, isn't it? Because you almost, as you go into that acquisition piece, you don't know what you don't know. So how would you, like, if you had to do it all again, how would you learn more about the cultural differences piece for maybe a different country, as it were? How would you approach that?
Yeah. So, while we do a business casing, on paper, it's not all about financial metrics and performance metrics. The people metrics is equally important. And how do you identify that? And how do you, at an early stage, how do you also identify who are those integration leaders and partners on both sides of the organization? And how do you bring them up to speed? Is there an occasion where before you kick it off, actually can they come and visit and live in where your headquarters or the acquiring company is, to embrace all of this and be prepared for? That's probably how things that I would do differently. But really engage and acknowledge. People mostly care about, have you thought about it? Have you thought about how the employees will feel? is mostly the primary question, rather than having it all accurate and correct and figured out.
Yeah, and I think there's an awful lot of tension that goes into due diligence around sort of the financial metrics and the productivity metrics, but perhaps not enough focus is on the like you say, the cultural piece, the alignment in terms of people as well.
Yeah, yeah. And during those times, there were a lot of emphasis that I have seen on system integration and process integration, which is absolutely essential. But what I also say is being empathetic, and also include people related metrics is important, because if systems doesn't fall in place, or the process doesn't fall in place, it's the people who will make it work. You will still be able to win, because the ideas of building companies remains in their heads.
So, talking of systems and processes integration, again, that can be a real challenge because you've got a new, like you say, you've got a new acquisition, you've got a whole new country and culture to deal with, but then you've also got to align that organization with the parent organization. So, how did you approach it, and how did that process go for you?
Yeah. So it is important decision factor, and mostly the cross functional teams that I used to work for. Not everybody who is actually handling those systems were aware that we are going through this kind of an acquisition, and then we will have this challenge. So prioritizing and planning this out is a proper project management. And then I believe that everybody in my team should have some sense of project management, whether they are project leaders or not themselves. So that is important from a overall generic knowledge skills point of view. But if you have a project management office, or somebody who is overseeing the integration project, that tends to go well, because you will then have all of these elements coming in place, whether you have planned it, thought through, or new challenges that is unaddressed coming off. You can plan it all, and you can start building that expectation and embarking that journey. And critical decision making in terms of systems, which systems will take over, whether we have, from an acquiring company, do we have a better system so that the acquiring company will integrate it, or is it the other way around, which could be a bigger challenge as well. So acknowledging and identifying those, and then make the best of the technology platforms that's available out there, to be able to seamlessly bring in that data and integrate. What's important, is it the HR management systems or the ERP? Have to think through all of these things, and technology platforms, how things work. Those decision points are very critical from executing this integration project.
And again, we've talked about people, we've talked about processes, and obviously, what about things like reporting? Was there a challenge aligning reporting metrics across the two organizations?
Um, Again, embracing the fact. First of all, I think the critical questions is, are we integrating straight away so that there is one metric? And if so, which part of the acquiring organization is it rolling up to? Whether if it's a small sales engagement kind of an acquisition, is it all going under a sales leader within the organization? Or if it's a technology integration, which business unit is it going under? Now that clarity is important. And then identifying the lead metrics, which both the organizations are working on, and how does that coming together for achieving those lead metrics in the organization that is owning. That kind of clarity is important in building that business case from a finance and financial metric point of view. We do a lot of due diligence in the beginning, but breaking it down operationally as well to identifying those lead metrics becomes super important. And then with that timeline, as long as you are working on those lead metrics and achieving the little targets that you have defined on both ends of the organization, you will come together and make things happen. If you don't measure those early indicators, then if you don't continue to measure the lead indicators, that kind of is where you will lose time to identify what can fail and what is not happening.
Amazing. And thinking back, having been through that process, what questions do you wish the team had asked at the beginning stages of deciding on the acquisition that you never thought about to ask?
Yeah, so we always take. I'm keeping all of this very generic because there were different size of organization, different places that you can imagine that I was involved with. But to answer that question, mostly you will think about what questions from top down approach versus bottom up approach have been factored in building that business case, right? So typically if it's all top down, yes, this is a good company which has good reputation, can bring in a lot of revenue, etc. What is the bottom up, and which cross functional leaders have you involved to ask those questions, to factor in for the due diligence? That becomes important, because in most of the cases the confidentiality is a reason why you will not be able to kind of involve more people. It can kill the whole project if you're not careful about managing that. So that's a real challenge. Despite the challenge, who is the representative? For example, a CFO can be representative of the entire operational function. And from my point of view, CFO plays a bigger role, and it continuously evolves. So he can speak for the HR function, the operations function, the administration function, legal compliance, and you need that representation. Are we asking questions with the leaders who are kind of leading this acquisition program, who can truly represent everybody? And certainly a customer representation is important. It's not all left to the salespeople to think about customers. It's the technology people. It's CFO's responsibility as well to always think of where in all of this, how is it going to impact the customer. With that kind of questioning and thinking, I would make the due diligence questions in that kind of a very very similar to a balance score reporting structure.
So bringing a customer focus into the due diligence process and understanding their perspective as much as anything else.
Absolutely.
And so we've talked a lot about, international expansion and acquisition and alignment, but you've worked across the globe in a number of different countries, a number of different companies. So, kind of, how have you seen things change over your tenure and your career in finance, and what does that mean for finance leadership?
So the major changes that I have seen is, being so probably the finance function is the last one to adapt paperless, right? So we absolutely loved back in those days that everything has to be in original expense receipts.
Oh, I
The
tell you what, I've still come across people that are still doing bank recs on paper with a highlighter. I just, yeah, it's still happening today, actually.
Exactly. So it's one, because of the compliance requirement, because you don't want to be coming across as losing out on those tax benefits. It's not exempted if you don't have the proper records kind of a place. That's where finance people come, in asking this to be in a particular order. It has to be accurate, etc., etc. And then of course the proper control process. When you used to scan receipt, there was absolutely no technology available to make sure that it's not duplicated. You don't have two receipts coming into different places. So that changing to become paperless is the first step that I have seen. And then secondly, what has come to rescue in finance to seamlessly move along is the kind of ERPs who could be on cloud based. You go wherever and you should be able to plug in, don't have to rely on lot of IT support. Particularly in my case, when I was in different countries working through, I was remote. So probably I was introduced to this way of working remotely much earlier than many others, I would say. So first I had to lead being paperless. It's only the laptop that I will carry around, and then I will be able to work with this, is something that I started talking about when it was a challenge. and then being able to connect and work securely without having to depend. I think cloud-based systems have come a long way to help. So that's a significant change that I have seen. Yeah, and mostly working when you're in different places, working with consultants and experts in those locations. And what I have learned, fortunately, I had the experience of working in different countries. So there is fundamental approach which is common. So the nuances and the regularity, details, etc., may vary from country to country, but the fundamentals are similar. So for me, I would say for finance leader, it is okay to use your home country how things work to base your questions, to ask and understand, how common or different is it in a different country. So that is still important. You don't have to bind saying that, oh, that doesn't work this way, it's a different country, and this is how it works. But still, you can use your home country laws and processes to apply that logic to ask questions until you fully understand the other part.
And have you found, like, did you look at, when you think about sort of implementing new processes, changes, whether that's through an acquisition or not, were there any things that you learned about how to support people with change, particularly those perhaps that are maybe speaking a different language to you or have a
Yeah.
different, like almost a cultural piece that you need to think about?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think one of the fundamentals there again is having that patience to be able to articulate where your thought process is coming from, rather than telling people this is how it is done. If you kind of step back and then articulate why is it done this way is important, and allow them to even question and then offer a different way of doing things. You don't have to completely be democratic and then endless loop of everybody's opinion counts. But as long as you can strike a balance and keep that kind of organization success at the forefront of your thinking and communication, that is important. So one of my previous leaders have taught me one thing, which it stated with me, is that always think about organization first, teams next, and then individuals at the end when it comes to achieving a bigger objective. So that way, you are asking questions. How does it help the team? How does it help the organization? How does it help the customer? That helps you unblock some of these challenging different opinions, and then identifying the change resistance. Why are people resisting the change? Is it a fear factor? Is it an ambiguity and then unknown things and things that is not clear? So that is when you have to prioritize people, to see, okay, so how can I help him or her to understand where it is all coming from? And acknowledgement is more important in resolving. So as long as you're acknowledging that, okay, so we may have not figured out how all of this works in the whole process, but I understand and hear the challenges, and keep working through that is probably the way to make processes work.
And I think sometimes that's a really interesting point around acknowledgement. You don't always have to agree in change. You just have to acknowledge the fact that you perhaps have a different perspective. And like you say, finding that priority order. I like that I can imagine that triangle in my head, the organization first, the team second, and then individuals view on that as well, about how you drive that change. And did you, again, we talked a lot about lessons learned through this podcast, which I think is great, because I think sometimes we talk too much about what went well and not enough
Mm,
about learn. There's a reason experience is valued, isn't it? Because you get the opportunity to make mistakes. So going through
mm.
some of those change programs, what did you learn about how to manage change? What were the things that you sort of, your second and your third project that you went, right, I'm going to do that differently?
Yeah, I think having a few discussion partners by my side early on and throughout is one thing that I will change. And then at the earlier stages, I have failed especially when it comes to system implementation and projects, it's probably I know this all is a wrong approach that I have taken and failed and learned. So that I would avoid at any cost, and then trusting people in being part of it. So investing time in building your team, whichever way that needs to be set up, is important, and then you use them as discussion partners, bring their opinion into the conversations, and use their ideas and suggestions where it is feasible. So basically, integrate things. Project management is all about identifying who is playing what role. It's not room full of people. It could be two people, it could be three people, but what role are they playing? So I kind of use the RACI metric more often, and that has started to help me a lot in terms of setting expectations. Even to an extent, in some cases, I have always advised my teams to think about RACI when they are going into a cross-functional meeting, so that gives them clarity, or if not, ask questions to get that clarity. What role are you playing in this? And then you will be rightfully be helpful and useful in that conversation. So yeah, so that is one thing that I would always put in place, to have the team, but also have a AC kind of a metric to identify what role each of us are playing.
And for those perhaps that either haven't come across it or haven't used it frequently, talk us through what that racing model is that you use and how you use it.
Yeah. So RACI model stands for responsibility, accountability, and being support, being consulted or informed. So what I have seen is in any of the project, particularly in the cross-functional projects that finance leaders tend to lead with, each of these represents, or everybody who is playing a part will be able to associate their role into one of these things, right? Say, for example, if I'm implementing a finance system as a CFO, I'll be accountable for it to work. Whether it works, it happens. If the implementation project, what happens to it, I'm accountable for the organization, right? I may have an implementation leader who's responsible for making sure this is being implemented on a timely manner in the most expected way, right? The others in the cross-functional team, some will play a consulting role where team is asking their advice and so on, and there are a lot of supporters who will have to provide data inputs, validate data inputs, and so on and so forth, and there are people who will be there in those team meetings who needs to be informed of what is happening, so that they can raise their hand how this impacts their work, or how can they help and support and change that. So at the start level, on a project level, you will be able to identify what roles each of them are playing. But when you start bringing it down to activity levels or a task level, on that activity, who is playing what role? On that task, who is playing what role? Because on a project, I may be just there sitting, for example, if somebody else is doing something, and then if I'm there to be informed. And when I raise my hand and offer help, one of my team member can come in and then support you. They will play a support role in that particular task. So that's how, kind of cascading all of the various roles that one would play in a project management.
Absolutely. And I think people undervalue project management within implementations and transformations generally. I think it's, and you talked about like everybody in your team having a capability around project management. Tell us a little bit more about that. Like how do you assess that? How do you build that skill set within your team?
Yeah, absolutely. So take for example the regular activities that we do as a month end closing, right? What a financial controller is essentially doing is running that project every week and every month and every quarter, right? So making sure that all of the team members are doing their part, and then on a timely basis, so that that person has a holistic view who is working on what and what needs to happen on that kind of sequence, effect and impact, to do be able to close the books and report to the management accounts. That's project management. So use that as an example, and then take it, for example, when an FP&A head is leading a budget process, that's proper project management. They have to make sure that everybody is understood what are the timelines, what are the kind of various inputs that we need, etc., etc. How do we adapt that kind of a project management thinking? So it is not and I also tell my people, team members, that it's not expected that you do it all. You have to own it in a way that you know who is doing what and when, so that it all falls in place. And that's project management in your mind. So kind of, keep it simple, keep it easy to understand, use examples of what we are already doing, and then name it differently if it needs to be named differently. And then use examples of, okay, so if this is the kind of things that you're doing next, how about adapting this approach and tracking it all in one place for your own visibility and for my visibility, so you don't have to spend a lot of time keeping me informed, as long as you share a tracker. So that's the approach that I go about.
Yeah, and I always find so I'm a big believer in month end trackers. Like I always have done, and I find that those that have the most efficient month ends are always those that have a month end tracker. They've got who's
Yeah,
doing, they've got all of their month end tasks, they've got who's accountable for delivering on that, they've got expected dates, they track, when they actually delivered it, and it is run. And I think it's because I work in projects, it's run, like you say, with a project mindset.
yeah,
And that's a really great tool and a way to, I guess, to think about it. We don't necessarily need an entire team of project managers, but what we need is a project manager mindset within finance.
exactly, exactly. And what I love about selling this back to the team is where they can avoid duplication of work. If they can see that they don't have to repeat this explanation in number of places to number of people, okay, that's a lot of savings. And hence the tracker, providing the visibility in whichever shape and form, or use a tool, is helpful. That, and that gives me that kind of a feedback loop process. Because one thing that was very painful for me to see is you spend a lot of time to produce an insightful analysis, and it took so much of resources in the organization, even if the decision was taken, was impactful, or did not take, for with all the informed decision, it is not repeatable. So because it takes so much of time and of people leaving their regular work per se to be able to support this analysis, it's not repeatable. So when I came across these kind of situations, that okay, so there was an analysis done last year, and this was the decision taken. Oh, how about revisiting that? If it was super important, how about revisiting that every quarter? And then no, we can't do that, because that takes so much of time from people. How do we automate this? How do we integrate that into our regular feedback loop process? Did our business finance partners share that information with the management accountants and to the operational finance part of things? If they had, then maybe they will start capturing information, which becomes seamless, so you don't spend so much time again to collect that data, whether it's operational across different cross functions as well. Now, that kind of feedback loop, to make sure that we are not only optimizing the improved and advanced tools and techniques, that technology that we have, but also within your way of working, are you sharing a feedback to the people who provided you with the data? That's a kind of thinking I try to install.
And I think there isn't enough focus on that as a whole. So again, with what we do, I spend a lot of time digging into people's reporting structures and how they're almost on where they're collecting data from. And like you say, the amount of time that is spent on almost cleaning up data in the first instance is huge. And that is a real challenge for a lot of organizations. We need to shift, and we are shifting, which is really exciting, I guess, to more operational data flowing directly into finance, but that itself comes with its own challenges.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. So I'm a big believer in continuous learning, and the evolving technology doesn't make that by choice. You have to be always up to speed and learning. So currently, I'm mostly researching what are those technology platforms that's out there which can, one, seamlessly integrate data, and two, help you cleanse data where you need the data, or where you find it to be very inconsistent. And then finally, if there is any opportunity to automate a workflow, I normally take this extract from this system, do a kind of a regular manipulation or interpretation of data, and then feed it elsewhere. If I can only automate it, it will save a day's time of one of my team members. That kind of technology is available out there, so I'm very keen and curiously learning about it.
No, absolutely. That, and I think the whole how we manage data is for me, one of the most exciting aspects of AI, because I think
Yeah.
that will genuinely transform how we work with data, which is, for me, is very exciting. But then I'm a data geek, so, and it sounds like a bit like you are as well, Ajit. So two data geeks on a podcast is always is a dangerous thing. So we've talked a lot today we talked about a lot of things. We talked about global expansion and managing acquisition and alignment. We talked about building that project management mindset within your team, particularly in finance. But, if you had to give your sort of top tips for anyone that's going through a big change or transformation, whether it's process, technology, or people related, what would be your recommendations and things to consider?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's the mindset that I would focus on. You're given this task. The most challenging, if somebody like myself, I will be shooting myself if I don't know it all by myself. And then the tip that I would give is, no, you don't have to know everything by yourself. You need to know what is the objective, what's the vision, what's the end goal, what good look like. If you can define that, what good looks like, and if you have an opportunity to work that through with the team, I would definitely encourage to do that. That's probably the top tip. What good looks like when you come out of it, what's the achievement that you need to see, and then start breaking it down. How do you approach it? Will help you have that execution roadmap, and then balance this out with the management or a senior executive sponsor's expectation. And again, that's another thing that I would always say: a big project or a change management will need to have an executive sponsor, who is then either validating what you're doing, providing the top down guidance, but also managing expectations with the other senior executives of the team as well. And then of course securing the budgets and resources that you will need, right? So that's important to identify and pre-agree who is actually the executive sponsor for this program, is important. And that's probably I would go about. And then along the way, change management is also super critical for people behavior. Identify what is driving. Genuinely, if some team is already completely, they are burning out because they are working on some other big project, be mindful in accommodating that in your timelines, or raise a red flag to your sponsor why your project will become difficult because one of the teams will be a blocker, because they have other priorities. And then people might say, if you don't give them enough clarity, there may be insecurities, particularly with AI kind of projects that you're bringing in without you saying anything. They already assume some jobs will be lost because of automation, etc. How do you address those as part of your planning process is something that I would ask a question. So just to add, mostly you and I will agree that AI will only enhance what we are doing, but being able to clear with that and address as part of the change management is important.
Absolutely. And I think AI for me is very exciting, but it's like anything, it's an incredibly powerful tool that needs to be used in the right way, is my view. And I think there's a lot we're going to be able to do with it. And if we think about some of the blockers that the world has, and finance, just thinking about finance to growing and developing, like time is such a precious piece. And I think that's what AI is going to give us. It's going to give us time, and then it's up to
Yeah.
us as finance leaders to decide how we use and spend that time. to drive change. So thank you so much, Ajit, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. And if anyone would like to connect with Ajit and contact him, we talked earlier about sharing his LinkedIn profile, so that will be in the show notes. So I wanted to say a massive thank you, Ajit, for joining me on the podcast today, for sharing your insight. It's been really interesting to hear about your experience driving change, not only in your current organizations, but also cross countries and cross cultures as well, which is exciting.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here today and be able to share all of this. And like you said, I absolutely welcome for anyone to who wants to get connected via LinkedIn. Happy to set up some time and have a chat about things that they want to talk about.
Absolutely. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, guys, as usual, please do leave us a review, send me a message telling me what you enjoyed so that we can make sure that this podcast is right for you. We have a continuous learning mindset on this podcast as well. So thank you so much, Ajit, and thank you to our listeners. We'll see you next time on the CFO 4.0 podcast.